Welcome to the Tiny Gospel Radio Hour. Today we will be talking with Harvey Yoder, who is a Mennonite pastor who's served and been part of house churches. This is in and around the Harrisonburg area. Harvey, am I getting that right?
Yes.
And as we talk about what it means to live in a very intimate community, I figured I would start out asking. So, Harvey, what's your experience with small church life? How, growing up, uh, did you first experience worship in an intimate community?
Not in a formal sense. I grew up Amish actually, and then came to Eastern Mennonite College, then now university, when I was 21, and then became a Mennonite. Uh, I grew up in a community that had very close connections with each other, interacting with each other frequently, constantly during the week, helping each other on the farms that were adjoining, helping each other with special projects and so on. But as far as intimate spiritual conversations, it was in college when I met regularly with a group of other guys, just for conversation, support, encouragement, uh, so on, that I saw the value of intimate relationships in the round, as over against church, where we typically have people in a sort of rectangular architecture, with the pulpit in the front, elevated, and everyone in rows and looking at the back of each other's heads. So I began to be interested in connection with what we might call typical churches, to have cell groups within those churches that met other than on a Sunday morning, just to be church to one another in terms of bearing each other's burdens and praying for each other, etc. So, but I never really became acquainted with a house church, but kept reading about the house church movement. So that came later, after having served as a pastor of a typical Mennonite congregation. At the time I left, there were some 300 in attendance, membership of 200 and some. Yeah, that's a short introduction.
Short introduction. Was there a particular framework for the cell group or small discussion group that you gathered? Was it in a particular context or was it organic? How did that form?
Well, what happened when, after I had served at Zion Mennonite for 20 some years, um, we were crowded. We needed more space. We're a rural church, uh, 10 miles north of Harrisonburg, which is the closest city. Um, and a large percentage of our congregation traveled up to 10 miles or more to the service. And so while the trustees, the church, agreed that we needed to add more space, so contemplated a $500,000 project to expand the auditorium and add more Sunday school space, etc.
And what year
At
would
that
this have been?
point,
Just Harvey, just wondering
this
what
was
year to
1988. Yeah.
So it's 500,000 in 1988 dollars.
Oh, yes. Would have been a lot more. And so my thought was, why don't we establish a sister congregation or a daughter congregation in some other location? Not that the geographical location means that much anymore. Everyone drives to church, like rather than taking a horse and buggy, which is why we have so many Methodist churches all over the Rockingham County, was because people, didn't travel far. So I thought it would be better to have congregations that were more geographically um, together, and so suggested a location where there wasn't a Mennonite congregation. And the church, bless their hearts, actually encouraged me, accepted my resignation, encouraged me to do some thinking and planning. They would be helpful in launching another congregation. And so my wife and I began to meet with some other interested persons, a few from within the congregation, a few outside. Um, and we met to talk about planting a church, met weekly and began to experience a bond with each other. And after a year or so of doing that, decided we are a church. We can do church this way, stripped of all of the sort of the non-essentials and just basically the basic elements of prayer, fellowship, Bible study, mutual support, church at its very essence. So we decided, I had been reading about house churches anyway, and I was intrigued by it. So that's how the house church began.
Was there an aha moment for that, or did just sort of the spirit move within the group to say, all right, you know what, we are that church now?
Yeah, I think I can't explain exactly. There wasn't any particular business meeting where we made a formal, action or whatever, but just by consensus. And we asked Virginia Mennonite Conference whether we could be recognized as a legitimate congregation within the Virginia Mennonite Conference system. And they were happy to support us in that. And our dream was, David, to become a part of a kind of coalition of house churches. And we did at one point have two different locations, different settings for meeting and so forth. But our pattern was to meet in each other's homes. I did a monthly calendar just to indicate where we were meeting, who was going to be leading, etc. The format was we had an hour for just sharing, worship, prayer, etc., and then an hour of Bible study. We had no preacher as such, but all of us, or those who felt gifted in terms of Bible study, leadership, so forth, took turns. So I did maybe a Bible study once a month, and maybe led the worship part once a month, but different people filled in those kinds of roles. Um, that was the format for many, many years, 30 some years, until just recently, um, at age 87, after 60 years of being an ordained pastor, finally resigned. And we were no longer an official house church. Our group was small, but we still meet once a week for an hour, just for Bible study, prayer, mutual support, etc.
So the church formally no longer, it's closed as part of the official Mennonite community.
That's right.
but you're still meeting weekly to pray and to
Yeah,
study scripture and to spend time together in faith. So it is
yeah.
still kind of there.
We at Zion, we did
Hmm.
begin to we strongly encouraged everyone to be a part of a cell group within the congregation. Not nearly everyone participated in that, but that would have been my alternative model for a congregation. I still think it's a good one. A number of congregations I know are really strong in terms of small discipleship groups within the congregation being where a lot of the nurture happens rather than just on Sunday mornings. So, yeah,
And I, and I think that in in churches of any size other than a single cell, being able to have a small place where you know absolutely everyone face to face, where you can really have deep conversations about what's happening in your souls, what's happening in your lives, that's necessary for the health of the larger church. Um,
exactly.
Sunday alone, as much as I um, struggle to say that as someone whose work tends to center on preparation of the word on a Sunday,
Sure.
is cannot be the end of it, and it often isn't the foundation of it. It's that intimate connection that's most important.
I read
As
something once that really struck me, said that as a pastor, you can assume that there's a broken heart in every pew. And I reflected on that in terms of how often, how many people come to a church meeting on a Sunday morning with a broken heart or like, maybe varying degrees of grief or sadness or loss or whatever, and attend a service and maybe get some help, some inspiration, but never really be ministered to individually, prayed for, having people lay their hands on them or whatever. And that was our resolve as a house church, that everyone would have the opportunity every time to make sure that whatever was heavy on their hearts would be something that we would hear about and respond to.
and that's really the place. Inspiration hopefully is present on Sunday, but that is really the place where the work of healing as an act of the whole community supporting someone, that's where that begins and
Sure.
continues and is sustained in a much more natural relational way. uh, so it's a helpful piece. The As you were growing as a church, I mean, this is, you not growing, but as you were continuing to exist and evolve, um, how did your community negotiate life transitions? I mean, obviously, when you start out a community, you're in one place of life, but as you move through it, um, how did the composition of the community change? Did it remain the same? Um, how did it change as you, as a group, grew and aged?
Well, we had to do a lot of learning as we went along. As far as the traditional kinds of practices like baptism, communion, um, having, a wedding or a funeral or whatever, baptisms, we've had, just in the circle, wonderful kinds of experience. Um, Communion, we always had a meal, a
Hmm.
carry-in meal. And the carry-in meal was kind of a metaphor for us for like a carry-in spiritual meal followed by a carried-in, food meal that each of us brought with us things to contribute to the service, to the well-being of the assembled group. And then the meal became a kind of Eucharist in a way, which I think probably in the early church, the Lord's Supper was not just a wafer and a little, really small amount of wine, whatever. But it was, I believe, in the context of a meal where you
Of an
broke bread
actual
together.
meal, an
Yes,
actual meal.
but not just any old meal.
Yeah.
It was like you recognize the presence of the body of Christ in this meal. And so sometimes we would have, prior to enjoying the rest of the food, we would break the bread and share the cup and have that be the beginning of the shared meal together. When it came to weddings or funerals, we would just, utilize whatever space in the community that was available. It could be in another church where someone had some connections or where they were going to be buried or whatever, in the case of a funeral. Or a wedding could be outdoors or at a location of their choice.
So as you've got those markers both of necessary liturgical reinforcement of the Eucharist, you've got weddings, you've got funerals, those life transitions. But other transitions I'm thinking of are that I think some small groups can have challenge, like how as a house church did you integrate or engage with the children or the adolescents? I mean, to what extent were those folks within a family system engaged, or how did that work?
Well, David, that would be, in my mind, one of the chief problems, if you will, one of the chief challenges, what to do with children. And I've often wondered what that was like in the case of the early church. As far as we know, there was no Sunday school type of thing going on with the children of believers. Children simply by observation, they learned to experience fellowship in the context of being with their parent and with their spiritual family of cousins and uncles and aunts, chosen
Hmm.
their chosen family. Um, we did try our best to make our services child friendly, to do things, tell stories, whatever. Sometimes we had someone take the children to a separate place for some time of their own, but that was clearly not a strength of ours. And that was a problem in terms of attracting families with young children who are used to having a Sunday school set up for them and also to have a youth group with youth sponsors planning for. So we never really solved that problem. And it was one of the reasons I think that we didn't grow as we could have and should have. We did form some alliance with some other neighboring house churches that we would meet like once a quarter, with three or four other house churches together in a common space that we just rented wherever. And that was good. We formed a lot of good friendships. The kids enjoyed each other, so on. But that's not really a success story on our part.
Yeah, and I know from conversations with other house church leaders that that is a challenge for gathering in not just intimate community, but in so you're within your home. It becomes more challenging if you've got little ones
Sure.
booping about.
Sure.
um, as someone who manages and uh, when I started in my ministry, lay folks were doing the children's message and children's time at my
Mhm.
congregation, and um, there were a few duties that were more quickly handed over to me than that one.
You do
Uh,
this, yes.
can someone please do this? And it requires, it's especially if you want to have a discipline and a sustained focus. There's a joyous energy to that, but it can be a little difficult. Even is it's a place of joy and celebration because little
Yeah,
ones don't totally understand what's happening.
that's
But
right.
they get there. So that is always a challenge in smaller community.
Mhm.
Um, so thinking about, I mean, you've talked a little bit about the dynamics of worship um, for mission work, as you as a community tended to one another's souls and spiritual life. As you're looking out for towards mission or evangelism, either service to the
Mhm.
community or connecting people with the gospel, how did that work within your house church context?
Well, our philosophy, if you will, or our theology, was that we were a meeting of missionaries, that we were assembled not necessarily to be a gathering to which we would invite people, and the success of our evangelism would be to see how many people we could get to come to church and to become a part of church, but rather that we are a gathered community that is preparing one another, strengthening one another for our mission through the week. So the church during the week is as real as and as central to who we are as the church gathered. The church scattered in its where people are working and where they're influencing their neighbors, co-workers and friends, and inviting them to become a part of disciple communities whose sole purpose is to do outreach. One of the blogs that blog posts that has been, I think, had more page visits than any other was one I entitled "For Here or to Go," and the focus of the piece was that we are here for the purpose of going. And so we are in constant kind of rhythm between going and being where God wants people to be loved and served and cared about and encouraged, and then gathered for our strengthening, our becoming better equipped to be the missionaries that we want to be during the week.
Right, because it's a community that becomes. I've been in small churches and encountered small churches that have become very insular, where it's just
Yes.
a tight group of folks who interact with one another and really have very little connection with the world. And that is not a good place to be if you're a little community.
And David, I'm not suggesting that we necessarily always did well in doing what I just said.
Mm,
Um, we we there is a tendency to become insular. There really is. And we have to constantly be encouraging each other to do that kind of ministry to the world around us, to continue the mission that Christ came on earth to do. So we were not necessarily stellar in that respect. The other area that I think we fail to emphasize as a house church needs to, is the importance of hospitality within your own household. In other words, that each member of the house church reach out to their neighbors, establish friendships with other people, invite people into the intimacy of your own home and to enjoy fellowship and how good it is to be with people who are loving, caring, etc. And then from there, invite them to the house church experience so that they already experience some loving and being cared for in their own homes and in your own homes and feel comfortable with you. It's an area that's has been called friendship evangelism.
Right.
And again, I don't know that we were that good at it, but that would be my dream, that house churches are about hospitality, first of all in your own homes, and then in the gathering at one another's homes.
Yeah, and that's, as opposed to insularity, one of the core elements both of a healthy small church community and churches of any size is being permeable to a certain extent to
Mhm.
community. And I think hospitality is a core part of that gracious permeability. Whereas as
Absolutely.
folks move into the periphery of your community and connect with you, they realize that there is grace present in this space they have entered. Um,
Absolutely.
and making those spaces, I mean, if you've got a building, if you've got an organizational church, it looks one way. But if it's a group of people with homes, then the home is the place that's going to happen.
Yes,
Uh,
absolutely. I would say that, I mean, we have never taken the position that house churches are the only right way to do church. In other words, you could argue that the first, second, and into the third century, that most believers did experience church in the settings of their homes, in one another's homes. I did an extensive paper in seminary on the role that buildings played in the experience of the early church. And it is on my summary of it is on my blog, HarvSpot. If you go to that and in the upper left-hand corner in the search bar, just type in house church. Um,
I can
and
pick.
the
I'll pitch in
first
a link to
article,
that. Yeah, I'll pitch in a link to that in the transcript to
yeah,
this, just to make sure
okay.
folks get it.
And I think a lot can be said for house church as being a scriptural model. But I also see the potential value in existing congregations being a place where you have the good Sunday morning meeting of house churches. One of the local churches here, Harrisonburg Mennonite, is fairly large, and its Sunday schools are known for being a kind of congregation within a congregation. And so you have under shepherds in each of these Sunday school groups, and they are called discipleship groups. And I think that's a good hybrid model. I do still have a problem that led me to resigning in the first place from Zion is where do we spend our money? How do we get the most bang for the buck when it comes to the kingdom of God? Is it going to be in ever more elaborate, spacious kinds of buildings? Is that what is going to really add to the God movement that Jesus came to establish? Is that really what he had in mind? So I'm skeptical about the value of buildings, but let's at least use them for larger gatherings, but not make that the sole or the primary space where we experience church.
Yeah, and I think that is again a strong and scriptural model. The challenge is a building an edifice, or is a building a facility, meaning something that specifically facilitates mission, and engagement and welcome. And if it's an edifice, you tend to want to sustain and supportive. If it's a facility, then it's a common house. Then it's a
Yes.
place where, yes, it's a place you have as the community, but its purpose is a broader service. And that is
Absolutely.
always a challenge if we get fixated on a
Hmm.
space. I think one of the other folks I have talked to as part of this podcast series had described they've had have a lovely old space, and at one point someone accused them of having an edifice complex. Um, and they're like, no, as long as we're worshiping here, it's not a big fancy space. We put money into maintaining it, but we have no desire to do anything other than to keep it serving its purpose. Um,
Sure.
and its purpose is not itself.
Absolutely.
So in-house churches over the years in the communities, as you gathered Family of Hope, um, how in the small church, in this like little group, did you manage disagreement about direction, or any other forms of conflict that I realize family systems and little groups are completely devoid of conflict. um, but where those disagreements arose, how'd you work through them in that much less formal setting?
Well, I really think we were blessed, and almost the word lucky comes to mind, that we had very few kinds of issues that led to like separation, where
Mm,
people left in a state of conflict, whatever. That happened, of course. And we did lose some members early on to a movement that came to Harrisonburg that is now called the 12 Tribes, almost a kind of cult-like movement that some people were attracted to, just as they were attracted to something they saw as radical in the house church. They saw
mm,
this as even better because these people were actually living communally. And so that looked even more like faithful to the early church kind of model.
mm.
So we did have, that's where we went from two house churches to one again, was a number of people joined that movement. Otherwise, we had very few business meetings ever. Whatever business we had to conduct, we did together and by consensus. Um, and it worked very well for us. So I, I can't say that this was due to any particular skill on my part as a functioning leader, but we were blessed with a group of people who really cared about each other and took time to listen to each other's differences. We were not a homogeneous group. About half of us were cradle Mennonites, and half were, Catholic, Presbyterian, Methodist, from a variety of backgrounds or no Christian background at all.
Right, right. I think for the Methodists, given that the my understanding of the primal method of John Wesley, that method was small groups.
Yes.
Um, the core discipline was mutual prayer and accountability groups towards the purpose of discipleship. So, how the Presbyterians
Right.
managed, I don't know, but um, for the Methodists, hopefully that was an easier transition in. Um,
Yeah.
one place there's often conflict outside of like people arguing about building spaces, which you don't have to worry about in a house church. But if you maintain a common purse for the purpose of mission or support for those in need, was that something that you folks had as part of your house church work?
Yeah.
And how did that
Yes.
work for you?
Well, being a part of Virginia Mennonite Conference and the larger Mennonite Church USA, we did have a budget. It was like a budget that didn't have local expenses other than maybe, printing, postage, an occasional um honorarium for someone we invited as a guest to lead a Bible study or whatever. And there was one year just several years ago where we had absolutely no local expenses. Everything went to various Mennonite and other agencies, not just Mennonite, but for outreach, relief, publication efforts, education, like EMU or Eastern Mennonite Seminary, whatever. So we did contribute to the larger mission of the Mennonite Church, plus we had some other favorite kinds of projects that we wanted to support as, based on the interests of members of our group. And those contributions were very small because our budget was small, but it was highly focused on needs outside of our group rather than the maintenance of our group.
Hmm. Were there, as you came to decisions about particular missions to support, again, at the level that a small church does, um, how did those conversations happen? Was it just a question of a member of the group had felt a calling or a passion to support it, or was there more discussion?
Well, after we established our first budget, which we sort of went by the guidelines that were suggested by Virginia Mennonite Conference, MCUSA, as to the per member expectations or whatever. After we did our first budget, from there on, it was just a matter of tweaking, maybe adding something. We always had a kind of discretionary fund uh, that could be flexible, and sometimes we would just designate a certain amount of that fund for a special project that someone had a passion for. But mostly we just continued the same pattern pretty much with some minor adjustments as we went along.
Yeah, which tends to the pattern and rhythm of life within a group can establish itself and just become part of the you all have now have a mutual expectation, and if you're talking decades and decades,
Yeah.
you all get formed by one another. Um, as you're thinking about the experience of that community and having spent most of your life in house congregations, are there particular learnings or experiences that feel worth sharing that we haven't touched on? Anything
I don't
that
know.
stands out?
One of the just overall concerns that I've had, David, about Christendom in general is how individualistic our theologies tend to be, reinforced in many cases by our hymns. A lot of our hymns, rather than using plural pronouns, are like, blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. And I came to the garden alone. That we, and this applies not just to, concern about promoting house churches, but the very concept of citizenship in the kingdom of God, which something larger than ourselves, rather than a highly autonomous individualism in our faith. And that has been a major concern of mine, epitomized by the the publication of Sarah Young's books on Jesus calling, and she sold millions of copies of this book. And in the
I am quite familiar with it.
yes, in the introduction, she's saying that when I use the first person singular, I, me, mine, always refers to Jesus. The you refers to you, the reader. And when I think about that, I thought that was an astonishing statement in light of the fact that the, the Bible that we are basing our faith on is almost totally dedicated to address to communities of people rather than individuals, other than the book of Philemon, or you might say the Proverbs are highly addressed to individuals and so on.
But
But
even
this is,
even the Proverbs, their primary focus, the primary focus of the whole wisdom tradition is how do you stand in relation to your neighbor and your community.
absolutely, absolutely.
It's that is the heart. The heart of wisdom is not self; it's how
Yes,
you relate.
yeah,
Um, and it is an easy thing to miss. And I think, just to echo that, I think it's in a time where we are increasingly atomized. Um,
sure,
the the structures of um, the structures of the marketplace around us want us to only see what we want to see rather than genuinely seeing our neighbor. The algorithms are specifically tuned to isolate us from one another in our own echo chambers, and that's a
absolutely.
that is a very particularly dangerous hell for us to fall into.
So the theme of I happen to be doing my monthly Bible study Sunday, and we're going to talk about Christian citizenship. That we are in, God's design from the very beginning was that it's not good for this dust man, Adam, to be alone, but I will create a helper suitable for him. The two of them will have dominion over whatever. And then, of course, you have the Cain and Abel story. Am I my brother's keeper? The obvious answer is yes, indeed, you are. We are, first of all, citizens of something larger than ourselves and larger than just our own private relationship with God. So, again, that's not necessarily just a house church thing, but it's just been something that I've been increasingly concerned about individualism and then the kind of Christian nationalism that is sort of a counter to that in a way, but it's still way too narrow. That it is us, the United States of America in our case, that really matter, and the rest of the world is just foreign.
You
Uh,
know, as if Pentecost never happened.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, so it is those I think are places, you know, in an extremely large church. There is the danger that you equate that, a single particular person who's interpreting reality, the faith for you, and a mass, that
Hmm.
shapes your faith in a very different way than sitting in a circle with a group of people you've come to really deeply know and connect with. Um, it shapes your soul differently, and I think it's
Absolutely.
one of the great strengths of the small church, where you know people in all of their blessedness and in all of their mess.
And my dream, if I were to have had the opportunity to be a part of a conventional church again,
Mm.
conventional church life, one of the first things that I would wish for would be that we could replace the pews with a circle of chairs. And, I think God really likes round things. In fact, the in the Revelation, you have the throne surrounded by the 24 elders and all of the hosts of heaven, and everything is in the round.
It it is. It is a good way to spend time and connected. And I say that even loving my dear little church with all of its cozy, soft pews.
Sometimes I would, at Zion, I would, for a song or a prayer or a benediction, stand in the aisle in the middle of the auditorium and have everyone stand facing me, toward the center. Not that I
Yeah,
wanted to be the center of attention, but to face one another and sing to one another, pray with one another, and think of ourselves as being a circle of people who are dedicated to Jesus and prepared then to turn in the opposite direction and go our various directions as a scattered church in mission.
yeah, which we do have to be. Both of those things at the same time.
Absolutely.
Well, Harvey, is there anything else you'd like to share or anything on your mind today you'd like to offer up?
Well, I just appreciate the opportunity for this conversation. I can't think of anything else right now, but thank you for giving me this invitation.
Oh, absolutely. And I appreciate you sharing all of your wisdom of a lifetime of being part of intimate churches and house communities. We'll chat a little bit more after we wrap up.
Sure.
But right now, we have been talking with Harvey Yoder and talking about family of hope and what it means to live in little churches in the round. Thank you so much, Harvey, for this conversation. This has been the Tiny Gospel Radio Hour. Go and be blessed.